the Reverend Dr. Robert Thompson, or the Dr. Reverend, but I believe it's the Reverend Dr. Robert Thompson from the Union United Church here in Montreal. He is the minister there, and the Union United Church is the oldest Black congregation in Canada. There's all kinds of history on it. It was founded in 1907, and it now boasts a more diverse congregation with members from over 50 different countries. As I said, it's the oldest Black congregation in Canada, and it was founded by several members of Montreal's Black community who experienced racial conflict and were banned from entering all-white churches. It was started with a treasury of $1.83 back in 1907. The church has gone to have a long and rich history and celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2007. And it's just one of the many churches that are part of the United Church of Canada, but it is believed to be the only church affiliated with the United Church of Canada that worships in the historically Black tradition and has a predominantly Black congregation. Reverend Thompson is speaking today about Black Lives Matter. And with that, Bob, I'm going to give you the floor. And anybody who has questions, you can go onto the chat and stick them in there, and we'll make sure that all the questions get asked at the end. So, sir, the floor is yours. You'll have to unmute yourself, Bob. And just lower your screen a little bit so we can see your whole head.
Is that done now? Am I okay?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you now. And there you go. I want everybody to see that goatee.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I want to talk about a few things here this morning. My family comes from the East. You know, they always say in the Christmas story, the wise men came from the East, and the wiser they were, the faster they came. And that's what kind of a Newfoundland story, Cape Breton story. But the other thing I'm reminded of the Cape Breton prayer, one of the first prayers I learned was, and especially, O Lord, do we thank thee for that body of water, the gut of Canso that separates us from the mainland of Nova Scotia. I'm sure some of you have heard that prayer in the past. So let me just start. I'm going to tell you 3 or 4 vignettes of my story. I'm going to come to how we tie Black Lives Matter together, because I think there's a systemic analysis that we need to make in this kind of thing. I was asked to come to Union for a 2-year interim period. They'd had some previous troubles before, and I had some skills in conflict management, and so that's why I was brought in. They're presently searching for a new minister. I'm hoping by the 1st of July they'll get it. I'm finished the 1st of January. I just had my 70th birthday, so I decided that I wanted to take my retirement. But yeah, and I was at 2 of your meetings not too long ago. A friend of mine was here from Cape Breton, and she wanted to keep up her meetings, so I attended a couple of your meetings. Now, one of the things where I first got in touch with Black issues was an aunt of mine, again a Cape Bretoner, met a gentleman on the streets of Boston. A lot of Cape Breton, Newfoundland women used to go to Boston to keep house. And she met this gentleman. She subsequently married him, and he was the tobacco farmer in North Carolina, in Fayetteville, and had 10 cousins, and they had a tobacco farm. So I was about 14, 15 years of age going down to North Carolina to pick tobacco. And my father had to shut me up a few times because they'd say something that was anti-Black, and I'd want to respond as a young kid, and my father would kick me under the table and say, Robert, you know, just wanting me to keep quiet and make any trouble. And then in 1981, a bunch of us from the church I was serving in Toronto for 16 years, you know, much like an area of Westmount, Leaside, Rosedale. And we heard about Habitat for Humanity, and we decided to take a group to Haiti. And my methodology of training and learning in my doctoral work was done on the case study methodology of doing theology, not your traditional matter. The traditional, tried to start from the Bible and move to the outside world. This methodology, which is my background, is you start with what we call the human experience. Living human documents is the word we use in pastoral counseling, and then you try to move that. So we took a group of 10 from my congregation to Haiti. And it was quite an experience for some of the people that went. The attitudes that some of our people had is that people, if you're poor, you're lazy, or you have an addiction problem. If you just get up off your butt like I did, you'd be fine. So we got to Haiti and we were helping to build a house. We had our stuff put into a house beside us that belonged to a witch doctor. And we had somebody with a machete that was walking around this house to guard our things there in this little village called Dumais. One of the things of Habitat is that you don't change the structure in the town. So, others wanted to bring in cement mixers and run lines for electricity. But I know what I did is for hours, we made cement for the walls, and I'd turn cement on a board, and then I'd for 20 minutes, and then I'd drop out for 20 minutes and move into the shade because it was so hot. Some of you probably have done that. So we built this house, and then we went to Mother Teresa's home for the dying. And as we were there, an amazing experience. There was glass bottles in the top of the cement walls to keep the beggars out from stealing the food of those who were dying. One of the gentlemen from my church was the vice president of the Conservative Party in Ontario. And George, as we got in, he was kind of getting a little mouthy with the guards. There was a guy standing over in the corner with a machine gun, and George brought new suitcases, and he had the little locks on them, and he couldn't get them open. And so after about 10 minutes, this customs guy just got out a big machete and cut through the leather and got his stuff out of there. And, the guy's still standing over there with the machete in the corner. And, George just kind of went crazy, as you can understand. And I put my arm around him. I said, "Let's go, George." And we walked out then and went in. Some of you probably been in places what they call taps to go out to the place where we were going to be working. So we came back to Toronto, and we decided, some of us, we wanted to try to establish Habitat Canada, which we did. And it was quite fascinating legally, because with Habitat, you buy your home for no interest, and you try to use local materials, and everybody has to put in so many hours of sweat equity. Well, we went to the government and Revenue Canada and tried to set up an account for us, and we couldn't do it because you're not supposed to get money back in and supposed to spend so much of your money, during the year. And Habitat was kind of counterintuitive, because you build up more money as you build more houses, and then you put more money out, and they just didn't understand it. And finally, we had to go to Britain, to British law, to get our number for Revenue Canada. Well, the most famous name that I can talk about, of course, everybody knows about, is Jimmy Carter. But when Jimmy Carter lost his election, he retreated to Plains, Georgia, and just a few miles away is Americus, Georgia, where the headquarters of Habitat was. They started building houses in the south in Florida, and he was very depressed. And his people really loved him so much in the White House, they gave him a set of tools, electric tools, and he set up a shop. And he was working in this shop. Well, the founder, Millard Fuller, had been in Africa working in Black communities as well. And he decided he wanted to do something for the Blacks in Georgia. He went back to a place called the Koinonia Farms, and he started reading the Hebrew Bible. And when they came to a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that those of you who are businessmen might not like, but the verse says, if you loan money to my people, don't charge them any interest. So they decided they were going to try to build houses and sell them without any interest. So Millard Fuller, he was a lawyer. You know what he used to do? In the middle of the night, he'd get up at 4 o'clock and he'd spend an hour and a half of his time defending young Black men who were on death row in the southern United States. That was one of his cause. So he wrote a letter to Jimmy Carter and he said, what would you like to work for our ministry and be involved? And Jimmy and Rosalind sent back a letter and said, well, what would you like us to do? So Millard, being a lawyer, he got a whole page of things he wanted to do, and he put yes, no to be ticked off, and Jimmy Carter ticked off everything he would do. So one of the things that came out of that, I'll just talk about this, became the Jimmy Carter Work Camp. And what they do is every year they'd go to a particular place in the world and they'd build, say maybe 20, maybe 40 houses in a week, and people would come from across the states and a few from Canada, and gradually this grew. And it really grew, this particular organization, because the press really focused on Jimmy Carter, and they would be coming in and taking pictures. And, I met a lot of significant people there, as I was allowed as the chair of the board from Habitat Canada to attend all those meetings. So that is kind of how I got involved. And I traveled a lot across the states and met with people in Black communities. One of the things I found in Black communities, I went to Africa a couple of times, and one of the things I used to find in terms of social analysis is that so many people who were Black were really poor because of health, especially in the US. And, if you had a sick child who was 8 or 10 years old with leukemia, like most of us, you'd give everything for that kid. And so I found out that so many had lost their homes and property and wages because of healthcare in the US. I know when we'd introduce ourselves in Africa, they'd go down a line and say, I'm Millard Fuller, I'm so-and-so. And I'd say, well, I'm Robert Thompson, I'm from Canada. And there'd usually be a cheer because I wasn't American. And I'd say, I think housing is a right, but I also think that healthcare is a right. And so I was always pushing in that organization for them to think more outside the box rather than about just housing. So that's just a snapshot of how I kind of got involved. And I retired, or supposedly retired, didn't take my pension 3 years ago from around Hamilton. And they needed an interim supply, we call it, at Union. And since I had some background in conflict management and a better process skills, they asked me if I would come here for 2 years. And with COVID, I have stayed an extra year. And I'm going to stay in Montreal. I've just bought a condo just below the hill on Atwater. It's interesting when you listen to people at Union what they think about Westmount. They think there's such a barrier on the hill that just goes up to St. Catherine Street. And when I said I was going to speak at the Rotary Club of Westmount, there was a kind of shaking of heads, because there hasn't been what they perceive as a good history between the two kinds of communities. Montreal is made up of a whole bunch of little communities or little villages that just came together, and little Burgundy happened to be one of those particular communities. Now, one of the things that's happened in those 100 years with Habitat, or with not Habitat, with Union, is that the original community was just little Burgundy, and people all lived in this community. And the first minister, or the longest, was very famous. I'm sure some of you have heard of his name, Dr. Est. He was here over 45. He was a student at McGill in 1925 and came into the United Church. And Union was initially, they started in a Presbyterian church, but they didn't feel accepted by people there, so they started their own. And it was originally a Congregationalist church. And they, of course, joined the United Church in 1925. So there was a lot of kind of history and background in that particular area. The other issue I wanted to talk about was I found a lot just in listening. Most of my ministry, I think, has been a ministry of listening. And one of the things I hear about the Black community is issues around human sexuality. Tell you another story about that. I was only 21 years old, and I was a student minister, my wife and and I worked with a supervising minister in a church north of Toronto, and he committed suicide on the 25th anniversary of his ordination. And he left a note on the door of the manse that said a couple was coming over to get married, and a note on the garage door said, "Poisonous gas inside. Please phone York Regional Police." And so what he'd done is he'd taken a vacuum cleaner hose and he'd put it over his tailpipe, and he'd asphyxiate himself in the garage. And he was gay. And what had happened was that that was a different age in 1970, 1971 for gay issues in Canada. When I was young, I asked my dad, my dad's a very professional guy. And I said, "Dad, what does gay mean?" He says, "Oh, men who wear women's clothes and women who wear men's." And he says, it's kind of like homo milk. They're all just churned up. And, I think many people, professional engineers and stuff like that, that was the kind of attitude they had about homosexuality. One of the issues I found is I've listened to people in Union is a big issue around that. They tell me their story is that many of them were sexually abused on the slave boats coming over from Africa when they were brought to the southern states. And then when they were slaves later on across the country, both women and men were very highly sexually abused. And that's still something that's very much into their culture. I mean, terribly afraid. And, most communities now, if you come out, that's not a big issue. My son says to me one time, we were talking about it, and he says, "Dad, why don't you give it up? That's not even an issue." So I got involved at the very beginning and started studying that. And I became part of an initial committee. And so did my wife. She was an Old Testament Hebrew scholar. About what was really going on in the United Church about that. And, we took a lot of heat because we were the first ones to bring that out in the open. And what happened with that is now most of the other churches in Canada stand exactly where we stand. But we just had our 30th anniversary of all that kind of stuff. So human sexuality, is a part of the Black culture and a real problem. The number of women, like I had a funeral not too long ago of a fellow who had 6 children by 6 different women. Now, some of that was very much accepted within the culture. They tell me, and I don't have any academic proof to this, but you know how many of them worked on the trains as porters and all those kind of things. And some of them had girlfriends in other places in the country, in Winnipeg or something, when they traveled out there. The other fascinating part I found is the railways had unions, but the unions and the management always stopped Blacks from joining the unions. And there's a new book out about that. And it was only later in the late 50s that the Blacks finally formed their own union. You know, they were paid pretty minimum salaries, and you know, there's still a few left at union who worked on the trains, and you know, they can articulate that. And the younger families, you know, they heard things from their parents and from their grandparents about that particular tradition, so that's part of their tradition as well. The other issue, you know, we need to talk about here in Montreal, you know, if you do systemic analysis, is the issue of natives. And the natives felt the same kind of things as the Blacks. You know, they felt ostracized, and people weren't fair to them. And so while we've got Black Lives Matter, we also have a great need for discussion about those issues. So it seems to me that the Black issues, the issues about human sexuality, the issues about economics, all these issues kind of weave together into one. And we can't just talk about Black issues at Union. We can talk, you know, about several issues that are there. And then recently, if you throw in COVID on top of that, you want to add what a complexity. We've been on Zoom like this since the 1st of March, only the first Sunday. And when the pandemic closed down quite a number of locations, we get a tremendous turnout. We get almost 150 a week. But what's fascinating again with Union and the Black community, they all started out here in Little Burgundy, but they gradually dispersed into all parts of Montreal. You know, there's a whole group out in the West Island. There's a group across the river. And they travel every Sunday still back to Union. So it used to be a community-based church, but it's not anymore. But it's a place where the Black community in Montreal has gathered and made friends over the year. That's been so important to them. So the sense of community is really, really strong. So these are a people who have been oppressed in so many ways and really feel that. Some of the older ones, they are afraid to articulate that. But the younger ones that have come along, they're the ones in the Black Lives Matter movement, really feel the need to articulate and feel some progress being made in that particular area.
Article is the April officer.
I'm sorry? Somebody said something, but I didn't get it. So those are the kinds of issues that they found. You know, I don't know whether they've ever heard, we talk about, in my tradition, we talk about the relational cross. We don't talk about the historical cross. And that means there's 4 directions of the cross. The one leads downwards into the very depths of the human soul. And you're trying to find out, you know, who am I? And what does life mean? I mean, most of us do that in my training in pastoral counseling. That's what the therapist or pastoral counselor does. And among the Black community, there's a great deal about reaching up to the heavens, and so much of their music and that is about that. And then there's arms outstretched like this to the very sides of the issues that they have in the world, about what the world is really like. So Union, interesting, has probably had a better balance in that kind of stuff than any other church that I've ever really known. You think of some of the people, you know, Union is really known for, you know, reaching up to the skies with its music, and the wonderful tradition of music, you know, coming from good churches as I have, and coming here, like the music just kind of blows you away. You sing an ordinary hymn and it's just pretty amazing. I'm sure most of you know some of the musicians that have come out of Union. You know, it's the roots for Oscar Peterson. The most amazing man, he's still alive and he's in church every Sunday, is Oliver Jones. A very quiet and very spiritual kind of guy. Most of you, the younger gang, probably know of Kimball Sherwood, who directs major choirs here in Montreal. So the musical dimension to them is really, really important. You know, there's been a few other people that have made their marks in Quebec and Montreal. Judge Westmoreland, of course, is very well known. So gradually they've moved out more into society musically, and also in social justice, particular issues. One of the interesting women right now, she works here in Montreal for a hotel chain, but they just moved her to Halifax, and her son played in the NBA. There's 2 or 3 NBA players, and she runs a program out of Halifax now where she interviews Black mothers of who have kids who've played in the NBA, and that's on every week. And it's quite fascinating to hear what the mother's experiences are. And again, this is kind of one of the outreach things that happen at Union. So, you know, they've given great leadership. You know, they even now they have a food bank that's been going on. So that's the arms outstretched again. I think yesterday they prepared 125 Christmas baskets and things, and it's not just for the Black community. I'm interested that we have a lot of Islamic people, you know, coming now. The community has changed, and so we get people around that area. They had a very vibrant prison ministry, and that kind of closed down for COVID. You can't get into the prisons right now, but I'm sure that will pick up. Over the years, they've been leaders, as they've had, you know, people from afar. It's the pulpit to come to if you come to Montreal. If you drive along Atwater now, you notice just put up on the side with a, we're helped with a grant from the federal government, but it's a picture of, I was going to say Desmond Tutu, but well, it'll come to me in a minute. Who's the president of Nelson Mandela? There it goes. And so Nelson Mandela came, and then there was a huge crowd. I've seen pictures of out on the street and everything. Bishop Tutu's been there. So very high profile speakers over the years that they brought in to talk about the history of the Black community. So as I say, the Black community is still dispersed, but the people, you know, are kind of like salt. They're still called to bring out the flavor of the Black community. There's just a few things that, you know, I wanted to say about, you know, Black Lives Matter. And also part of that is human sexuality. Part of that is COVID. We know the history of slavery. Most of us know the historical stuff, or a lot about it. So those issues are the ones internally that they're still struggling with. And I guess part of my process is been allowing people to articulate some of those things, you know, persons who have experienced sexual abuse, and you know, a lot talk about the Montreal police and how people have been killed. Mothers have talked to me about sons they've lost. Got one that shows me her wallet all the time with the picture of her son that was killed, and needing to negotiate some of those things in the community. Almost everybody, again, is bilingual. We're trying now we're going to start a new church that's going to meet, and we're trying to reach out to have a French service that, especially with the large number of Haitians in Montreal now, see if we can do some reach out and touch that particular community as well. So there's a few notes that I made. I just wanted to read you a quote. Jimmy Carter wrote a book with his wife, Rosalind, and he'd write a couple of paragraphs, and then Rosalind would write a couple of paragraphs, and you know, it would go Jimmy, Rosalind, and Jimmy Carter said, well, I never knew that the two of us saw things so differently. He said it always almost brought a divorce. He said, I'd written all these books on my own, but suddenly Rosalind get involved in it. And let me just read you a paragraph from Jimmy. One morning in New York, I was standing on the roof looking at Wall Street when I noticed an elderly woman just below me in a vacant lot. She was cooking her noon meal over an outdoor fire, burning wood scraps between several large stones. I was told that she was called the Russian princess, and she lived in an abandoned building next door without heat, electricity, or running water. And as those of you who have traveled to the States in the inner cities, there's hundreds of those. I went down to talk to her. She was boiling eggs and corn on the cob. And in answer to my question, she said she got along fine living as she did, and that some friends down the street gave her some water and let her bathe in their apartment whenever she asked. She was wearing an old but obviously costly silk dress and a long strand of pearls. When I complimented her on her outfit, she says, well, I haven't read this or worn this in several years, but someone told me that President Carter was working next door. She acknowledged my introduction with the aplomb of a true princess. And then this is the key line I want to read. One final note. My wife has never been more beautiful than when her face was covered with black smut from scraping burned ceiling joists and streaked with sweat from carrying sheets of plywood from the street level up to the floor where we were working, cutting subflooring with a power saw and nailing it down with a few hard hammer blows. Now here's the line that I want you to remember. What the poor need is not charity, but capital, not caseworkers, but co-workers. And what the rich need is a wise, honorable, and enjoyable way of divesting themselves of some of the overabundance. And if you asked Millard Fuller what the job of Habitat was, working mostly with Black community, is to rid the world of poverty housing. Good point. We don't have a housing problem. We have a capital problem. So I'll close with that. Take any questions.
There we go. Sorry, I had to unmute myself there, Robert. Yes, we have a couple of questions here for you, but first, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Sri. Sri, are you there? If you can unmute yourself, and you've got a question, I believe, for Reverend Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Reverend Robert, for enlightening us on some of the stories. Thank you very much. And I'm particularly impressed with the last story you mentioned, last statement you made, that what they need is not charity, but capital. I couldn't agree with you more, quite true. I'm just, if you go to the market, you see black grapes, white grapes, or green grapes. I don't see any one of them saying that, oh, I'm black, so I'm better, or I'm white, I'm better. They are all the same. They all taste sweet and good. So the point is, black, white, it doesn't matter. You cut, the blood is red. So in summary, the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm myself brown, so I'm
Yep,
colored.
black and brown, yep.
Yeah. And Black Lives Matter, I'm not quite in agreement with that movement. As a brown person, I can say, because that only causes more polarization in the minds of people. What is needed is not that kind of movement. If you really want to remove the barrier between black, white, brown, or yellow, or native, this kind of movement is not going to help. It causes more and more polarization in people's mind, which takes longer to remove. I just want to quote, I'm not in support of any political system, the democratic or the authoritarian or communist, but I want to say, quote something. USSR or many East European countries did not have a black, white, or racial problem during the communist era because they propagated their political philosophy first above everything else. So I believe the white black issue and BLM movement, all these things are a product of the liberal democratic political system that we are currently living with. That is my feeling. I just would like to know what you think about my comment.
Well, yeah, there's some positive things in that. I just think we need to listen to what people who are on the bottom, who feel powerless, make the analysis. I think we need to do a lot of listening about that. One of the things Habitat does is when you build a house in, say, Montreal, you have to build a house in a third world country as well. One of the things Jimmy Carter always wanted to do, which I wanted to do as well, I really feel strongly about it, having been to Israel and my wife being a Hebrew scholar, was he wanted to see Palestinian Jewish people build houses together. And that, at the level of the hammer, he used to say, we're all equal. And one of the positive things that happened over the years that, blacks and whites and browns building houses together formed new friendships, and they found that they had more in common than they had in the past. Yeah. So I've just been trying to listen to them. Ultimately, the goal is that all would be equal. But in the other thing, one time I went to the Soviet Union with them, and what we did is we were working with the Mennonite community. As you know, a lot of Mennonites left the Soviet Union in 1917, and a lot came to Canada. If you go up around Niagara Falls, there's a very large Russian Mennonite community. And we went there to try to establish credit unions so that we could help people in the Soviet Union with, capital issues. And that was part of a connection to Habitat that went with the Mennonite community, the remnants of it, because these are the grandchildren now, and they knew about great uncles and things like that were in the Soviet Union. So I think we're in about 85 countries now around the world where we're building. Canada hooked up with Haiti because we had such a large French-speaking group. Haiti has been the most difficult country we've ever had. One of the things is getting title of the land. Like there's no kind of surveyors, and you'd build a house and then somebody else would say, "Oh, you built it on my land." So it's been probably the most difficult country that we've had problems with.
We have another question here for you, Reverend, and I would ask Cyril Gagnon from the Rotaract Jean de Brébeuf to pose it to you.
Thank you, Jim. So my question is in perhaps along the lines to the other one. So the past decades and years have seen really a rise in the collective self, you know. There's a lot of pride taken in the culture, beliefs, language, and every activity around this. However, there also seems that the tension between these collectivities seem to have followed the same tendency and rose too. So like today's society is the most accepting it has ever been in regards to, as you mentioned, perhaps like the question of homosexuality and other subjects. And yet tensions show no sign of exhaustion. According to you, why so? And would there be a solution to this ever-growing tension between communities, groups, and individuals?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Just like in human personality, we move from dependency to independence to interdependence. And I would think culturally, we're at the stage of independence. We're moving ahead. That's why we have all these, different ideas on the cultural thing. What was going on in Quebec was about independence, and there's still a lot of that. I guess the dream would be that we could move on to the next stage of development, just as we do individually, to a sense of interdependence where we would recognize each culture, but there would also be a closer relationship to working together. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. But I feel like there would be like a huge obstacle in that, and that would be pride, because people seem to take so much pride, and with pride comes the lack of desire to communicate and work with other people.
Yeah.
So that just seems to work in opposite directions to me.
Yeah. Well, it just points out how tribal we still are.
Yeah.
You know, we're still a very tribal society. But maybe that's not a good answer, but I have about 10 more minutes, and I don't know how much time, Jim.
Well, I'm just gonna check out here and see, are there any other questions? I don't have anything else on the chat line here. So does anybody else have something to say? In which case then, Bob, if you have any last minute comments you'd like to make, now's a great time to make them.
No, well, thank you for inviting me.
David, are you hearing me? David Franklin? Okay, excellent. Would you be kind enough to thank our speaker?
Wait, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Reverend, I'm honored to be called upon to thank you. You'll be pleased to know that a very dear friend of mine, George Grant, Honorary Consul of Jamaica, is in the audience.
Good.
And on a personal level, my mother was born and raised in Glace Bay, Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton.
Proper ting, as they say in Newfoundland, proper ting. My grandfather was a coal miner.
In the Collier mines, yes.
Yep.
I've often passed your church on Doyle near the Atwater Market. I've noted the history of your church for many, many years, especially at the time of the building of the subway station.
Yes, that was quite a difficult time.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I am aware of that. You have revealed to us the problems and challenges facing your community, sexuality, slavery. It reminds me of a play I saw recently at the Siegel Center on Angelique.
Mm-hmm.
A tragic story indeed. And there are many stories like that that are left untold that still resonate in your community.
Yeah.
We're proud that we have you in our community, meeting the challenges that your community has, which are unique. So thank you for coming to us, and I hope you can tell your congregation that you have received a very welcome reception at the Westmount Rotary Club. We're
Right.
just up the hill, and we hope that maybe some members would consider joining us, because we have a motto: service before self. We help others, just like you are doing in your community.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
It would be very interesting if you asked some of them. You know, we need to be intentional about that kind of thing.
That's an interesting comment, actually, Robert.
I'll follow that up with Robert.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have just a quick question here, Robert. You had mentioned that I guess the church is still open.
No, just online like this.
Okay,
And a
okay,
lot of our people, you know, being older, are really frightened. A lot of them come by subway on Sunday, and you know, come up from Lionel Giroux, and they're very scared of coming back.
okay. Now, is there a meeting every week?
Yes, there is.
And is anybody welcome to come in online?
Yes, but you need a password.
Okay,
And yeah, because we've had some people try to invade it. And
Okay, understood.
so we give anybody who asks, you know, if they identify themselves, we give them a password.
okay.
So
So in that
if
case, I'm
you-
going to leave it up to the individuals in this.
Well, if you'd
group.
like to send me if Glenn would send me an email, I could send that back to him.
Excellent. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
If you're
Very
more
much.
academically inclined, there's a whole school of thought called Black theology. And originally it was James Coyne is his name, C-O-N-E. And he began in the early 70s. And there's an amazing kind of situation with his writing. It's the most articulate philosophically and theologically.
Much appreciated, sir.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm on
Okay.
my way.
Oh, well, if you have to go, go, but otherwise we have a couple more minutes if you can stay.
Okay, I can stay a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, we won't be very long. Very quickly, there is no next week. And there's no week after that. We're not meeting again until I believe it is the 7th of January. So everybody gets to take 3 weeks off and relax. Just so that you know, Don McKinnon, you will be the scribe for the next meeting that comes up. It's the 6th of January actually, and it'll be Mark Cho speaking, and he is the fellow that started up the Rotary Business Club here in the Montreal area, and he's going to talk to us about that club, what it is designed to do, and how you can get involved with it. After that, we have another Cho, but this is Dennis Cho, and he will be speaking to us from the Toastmasters Club of Montreal. On the 20th of January, this is one I think nobody will want to miss. Nakusette will be here speaking on behalf of the Native Women's Shelter. And I know that she is not a person to hold her tongue. She will have something to say to us, and it'll be worth listening to. And then the week after that, we were talking about aging gracefully, which we should all bear in mind. Our baritone or tenor is not with us today. And so I'm going to play the same anthem as we did last week, just because I had so many nice comments about it. And there's a few people here that haven't seen it. And with that, I wish you all the best. For those of you who I don't see to or speak to between now and the new year, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, have a wonderful Kwanzaa, and a great new year to all. So everybody take care of yourselves, and I'm going to share this now with everybody.
I think you need to share your sound.